André Rieu became the man who rescued the waltz from history and returned it to the living world. The Dutch virtuoso who broke classical music out of gilded halls and carried it into the open air, transforming massive stadiums on 6 continents into seas of sound, where violins climbed above the thunder of 100,000 people. With his unmistakable white bow tie, silver curls flowing around his face, and that almost impossibly sincere smile, he created the Johann Strauss Orchestra and turned a traditional ensemble into a global spectacle no record executive had ever predicted. At the height of his fame, over 2 million people each year gathered beneath concert lights and open skies, allowing his melodies to bring tears to their eyes.
Not tears born from sadness. Something deeper.
Recognition. The sensation that, for one perfect moment, beauty had found them before they had the chance to search for it. Yet beneath that dazzling success is a far less beautiful story. One shaped by a childhood dominated by the enormous expectations of his father. By a marriage repeatedly tested through years of exhausting travel. By a body pushed through thousands upon thousands of performances over 4 decades. And by a private sorrow so deep that even the deafening affection of an audience could never completely touch it. For generations, the world has celebrated his happiness, his laughter, and his endless enthusiasm.
But almost no one has asked what price he paid to keep that joy alive.
If André Rieu's violin has ever reached something inside you, whether in a packed theater, through a movie, or late at night when silence felt heavier than usual, leave a like to honor the man who believed that extraordinary music should never be reserved for those who could afford privilege. Because the most unsettling truth is this. Before André Rieu became a symbol of musical freedom, he was a child trapped beneath the unbearable pressure of a legacy he had not yet proven worthy of. André Leon Marie Nicolas Rieu entered the world on October 1, 1949, in Maastricht, a Dutch city filled with ancient stone streets and towering medieval churches, positioned at the southern edge of the Netherlands, with Belgium and Germany sitting remarkably close on either side. It was the kind of place where music seemed woven into everyday existence. Bells echoed through the streets to announce another hour. Military musicians passed through public squares during celebrations. And inside the Rieu family home, music was far more than entertainment or a pleasant pastime. It was the very atmosphere in which everyone breathed. His father, Johann Rieu, stood at the helm of the Maastricht Symphony Orchestra, a position that carried enormous respect throughout the community, the kind of achievement that caused people to immediately recognize his importance. Johann was not a vicious or heartless father, but he was exacting. To him, discipline was as essential as a perfectly measured line. Remove it, and eventually the entire structure would fail. The same strict control he demanded from musicians under his baton followed him into his home. Meals happened according to schedule. Practice was mandatory. Excellence was not something to celebrate. It was the minimum requirement. Failure was never treated as an option worth discussing. It simply could not exist. André grew up as the 5th child among 6 siblings, surrounded by a household charged with pressure, ambition, and impossible expectations. As soon as his small hands were strong enough to grip a bow, the violin appeared in them, less like a present and more like a responsibility already decided for him. He was only 4 years old. The instrument looked almost absurdly large against his tiny body, yet somehow he was expected to learn its language and eventually command it. Years later, he would speak about those early memories with a calm honesty of someone who had finally stopped fighting the past. His father, he remembered, never needed to shout. A single mistake could be followed by a silence more painful than anger. That silence, controlled, icy, and complete, became one of the most unforgettable sounds of his childhood. Not the roar of an audience. Not words of praise. Silence. The kind that could make a child feel, without a single word, that the distance between who he was and who he was expected to become was still impossibly far. School brought another version of the same pressure. At the Jesuit secondary school André attended, music carried prestige, but there was little room for celebration. Being the conductor's son meant expectations followed him into every classroom, and the standard placed upon him was always higher than the one applied to everyone else. Understanding was difficult to find. When another student missed a note or struggled through a musical passage, teachers offered patience and correction. André, burdened by a famous surname before he had earned one of his own, was judged against an expectation that left almost no space for the innocent failures of childhood. Ordinary was never considered good enough. Yet during much of his teenage years, ordinary was exactly what André seemed to be. He was a capable student, a committed violin player, a reserved young boy who had not discovered the hidden force within him that would eventually make entire stadiums rise to their feet. What carried him forward was not extraordinary genius. It was determination. The very stubborn streak his father had attempted to control had quietly transformed into something Johann could never have predicted. André had no desire to become another conductor standing above an orchestra, controlling every pause and commanding every moment of silence.
He wanted connection. He wanted warmth. He wanted the people listening to feel as though the music belonged to them.
As a child, he had watched his father's performances and noticed the audience sitting in perfectly arranged rows, dressed formally, barely moving, as though even breathing too loudly might violate some invisible rule. They applauded when tradition told them to applaud, offering appreciation with the careful restraint of people following instructions instead of surrendering to emotion.
To André, it felt suffocating. The music itself was not the problem. That music could be breathtaking. It was everything surrounding it. The formality,
the separation, the unseen barrier that kept the musicians on one side and the hearts of the audience on the other.
Something began forming inside him.
After the final bow, André stood near the edge of the stage and stared across the enormous square. For a long time, he said nothing at all. Later, in a rare moment of reflection, André offered a realization that revealed just how far he had traveled. I spent so many years believing I was bringing music to people. That night, I realized the music had belonged to them all along. I was simply the person who unlocked it. And once that entrance had been opened, there was no going back. Within 2 years, the Maastricht performances had transformed into an annual pilgrimage for devoted fans. 5 years later, television networks were broadcasting those concerts across 17 different countries. The child who had once learned every note beneath the cold pressure of his father's judgment had now built something that world could never have predicted. A classical phenomenon founded not on keeping people out, but on inviting them in. Not on restraint, but on celebration. Not on satisfying a handful of gatekeepers, but on moving millions of ordinary hearts to tears. And somewhere within the unbelievable calculations of that success, the exploding ticket numbers, the expanding orchestra, and the ever-growing list of cities demanding a place on his tour, André Rieu crossed a line that cannot be measured on paper. The invisible boundary between someone who simply pursues a dream and someone who changes an entire world. At some point, without a single announcement or defining ceremony, André stopped being merely successful.
He became a phenomenon.
And what followed challenged almost every assumption the music business had treated as unbreakable.
André Rieu did not simply become bigger. He became something entirely different.
During the final years of the 1990s and throughout the first decade of the new millennium, the Johann Strauss Orchestra evolved from an unusual Dutch experiment into an international institution at a pace so extraordinary that promoters, executives, and classical music experts struggled to explain what they were witnessing. The statistics were undeniable, yet the industry had almost no language capable of describing them. By 2002, André Rieu was moving more classical albums than any other living artist in the world. This was not a comparison limited to other waltz performers. It was not just a victory over fellow Dutch musicians. André had surpassed every other active classical recording artist, including musicians who had spent decades benefiting from prestigious institutions, enormous record companies, established contracts, and the unquestioned authority of elite conservatories. His 2001 album, Romantic Moments, reportedly moved more than 2 million copies around the globe. Then came Moonlight in 2004, appearing on charts across 14 countries at the same time. By 2007, Billboard magazine had named him the world's highest-earning classical musician, with yearly concert revenues reportedly exceeding $100 million. André was no longer trying to win within the traditional classical music industry. He had stepped completely outside its boundaries, built an entirely new universe, and somehow become the undisputed ruler of it. As his influence expanded, so did the Johann Strauss Orchestra. What began in 1987 with only 12 musicians eventually transformed into a traveling operation involving nearly 140 people, including instrumentalists, vocalists, dancers, technicians, costume specialists, and an enormous production team that moved from country to country with almost military precision. The scale of the operation was extraordinary. Around 40 massive trucks were required to transport the equipment needed for each production. Specially constructed stage designs could turn enormous modern arenas into lavish recreations of 19th-century Viennese ballrooms. Elaborate costumes were handcrafted in Maastricht by seamstresses who spent the entire year creating garments exclusively for the orchestra. Nothing was considered too minor to matter. The chandeliers hanging above the performers, the candelabras positioned beside the orchestra, even the exact cream-colored fabric used for the violinists' dresses, all of it was carefully selected, reviewed, and personally approved by André himself. Because what he had created was no longer simply a commercial enterprise.
It was an enormous artistic vision.
And André Rieu stood at the center of it as creator, conductor, artistic leader, promoter, and the emotional heartbeat of the entire operation. But the schedule required to keep this extraordinary machine moving was about to push him to limits few people could have imagined. If André Rieu's journey touched your heart, don't let his story end here. Like this video, share it with someone who loves music, and subscribe for more unforgettable stories behind the legends. And tell us in the comments, which moment from André's incredible journey surprised you the most? A thought that would remain buried for years before finally becoming a revolution. Even at 14, while watching his father lead the Maastricht Symphony before an audience offering polite applause, André Rieu made a private promise to himself. If one day he controlled the music, his concerts would never make people feel that distant.
He could not explain exactly what he intended to create. He only understood what he refused to repeat.
And sometimes, when a person's future is still hidden from view, knowing the life you cannot accept can become just as powerful as knowing the life you desperately want. He eventually left home to continue his musical education at the Liege Conservatory in Belgium, followed by the Royal Conservatory of Brussels, before returning to the Maastricht Conservatory, collecting training, qualifications, and technical discipline with the same careful precision his childhood had demanded from him. By his mid-20s, he had become a skilled concert violinist, respected within his profession, highly disciplined, yet almost completely unknown beyond the limited circles of Dutch classical music.
He was no child genius.
No overnight sensation.
No name that commanded attention.
He was simply a young violinist with exceptional control of his instrument, an imagination that refused to stay quiet, and an ambition so unrealistic that even those closest to him struggled to take it seriously. But the boy who had learned to survive inside the silence created by his father's expectations was slowly discovering another ability, the power to turn silence into something unforgettable. Then, in 1987, André Rieu made a decision that those around him viewed as either an amusing act of madness or a financial disaster waiting to happen.
He created an orchestra of his own.
And this was not going to be a modest chamber group of a handful of musicians appearing in elegant little recital halls. Nor was it a traditional string quartet hoping to secure a comfortable position somewhere inside the classical establishment. He brought together a complete ensemble of 12 musicians, dressed in elaborate period clothing and devoted to a collection of songs that the serious classical establishment had largely abandoned. Waltzes, polkas, operetta melodies, the timeless works of Johann Strauss, Franz Liszt, and Joseph Strauss. Music that critics had quietly pushed aside, labeling it too commercial, too sentimental, and far too simple for audiences who considered themselves intellectually sophisticated. Yet these were the very melodies ordinary people had adored for generations, long before prestigious concert halls decided they were no longer worthy of attention. André named his creation the Johann Strauss Orchestra, and in the beginning, almost no one showed up. Their earliest concerts took place in small Dutch venues, parish halls, local community buildings, and humble theaters where uncomfortable chairs and weak acoustics were part of the experience. Still, the orchestra performed with extraordinary skill. The crowds remained thin. The critics who occasionally acknowledged their existence did so with the kind of condescension usually reserved for people attempting something ambitious without the right credentials. Their reviews called the music pleasant, accessible, and charming. Each compliment was carefully disguised as an insult. Within elite classical circles, calling something accessible was hardly praise.
It was practically a sentence. It suggested the music lacked seriousness.
It suggested the performers were outsiders who had no place among the supposedly refined.
André received those judgments much like he had once endured the silence of his father. He did not collapse beneath them.
Instead, they hardened something inside him, a determination that required no applause. He had never created this orchestra to win approval from critics. He created it for the woman sitting somewhere in the audience who was discovering Strauss for the first time and realizing she had every right to enjoy it. For the elderly teacher sitting quietly at the back, someone who had spent a lifetime believing classical music belonged to a world that would never welcome him. For every person who had ever stood outside the gates of elite culture, convinced that beauty came with a secret code they had never been taught. And the breakthrough did not come as one explosive overnight victory. It spread slowly, almost invisibly, before suddenly becoming impossible to ignore. Throughout the late 1980s and into the early 1990s, the Johann Strauss Orchestra expanded its following one performance at a time, moving from one city to another and building loyalty through personal connection. André began stepping away from the stage and into the audience, playing his violin among the people instead of performing above them. He replaced rigid formality with laughter, warmth, and genuine interaction. He brought singers onto the stage dressed in extravagant costumes, delivering performances filled with theatrical energy that traditional conservatories had never encouraged and classical purists would probably have rejected. The invisible barrier separating performers from listeners, the same barrier that had disturbed André during his father's concerts, was finally beginning to disappear.
And then people started talking.
Not because of expensive marketing or powerful record companies, but because something real had happened to them. They told friends, family, and strangers, "You need to experience this.
You need to hear it for yourself.
You might cry, but somehow you will not feel ashamed of it." By 1994, the Johann Strauss Orchestra was routinely filling theaters throughout the Netherlands. 2 years later, audiences across Germany, Belgium, and Austria were joining the phenomenon. Then, in 1998, André Rieu stepped onto the stage at the Vrijthof, the enormous historic square in the center of his beloved Maastricht, and faced tens of thousands of people who had journeyed from across Europe to gather beneath the summer night and surrender completely to the music surrounding them. According to people who knew him during those years, that evening became the moment André finally recognized the true scale of what he had created. One longtime associate, who had remained beside the orchestra since its earliest days, later remembered something quietly powerful.